Hello. The Divine Code reading for February 25th, pages 525 and 526. We are in the chapter Precepts related to marriage, fornication, and divorce. Topic number 16. The court of Shem, son of Noah, issued a decree that it was forbidden for a woman to have licentious relations with an idolater, since it would cause her to be drawn after him to idolatry. This is discussed in Tractate of Vodazara 36b. Included in their decree was that a woman should be liable to capital punishment for this. This is why Judah sentenced Tamar to death, because he assumed that she had cohabited licentiously with an idolater. Genesis chapter 38:22, as explained in Tractate of Vodazara 36b. Although it is not clear if Shem's court decreed a punishment for a man who had licentious relations with a woman idolater, it is clear that they forbade a man to marry an idolater and turn her and bring her into his home, with permission for her to practice her idolatry there. Although from the Talmud, etc., one may understand that the decree was not applied to a man who cohabits with an idolatress, it appears that this is because the discussion in the Talmud only talks about licentiousness and is explicitly written in the Torah, in the account of judging Tamar. But logically, it would forbid a man to marry an idolatress, just as a woman is forbidden to marry an idolater. This is clear in Orachaim Genesis on Genesis 38:26. So we know from the Torah, because of the story of Tamar, that it is forbidden for a woman to be with an idolatrous man. And logically, it would also be forbidden for a man to be with an idolatrous woman. Although it is not clear if Shem's court decreed a punishment for a man who had licentious relations with a woman idolater, it is clear that they forbade a man to marry an idolater and bring her into his home, with permission for her to practice her idolatry there. The decision of Shem's court to include a death penalty in the decree was only temporary. Once the Torah was given at Mount Sinai and the 7 Noahide commandments were set within it forever, as explained in the author's introduction to this work, we do not find that there is any precept that includes liability to capital punishment for the act. So in the author's introduction to this work is available in the Hebrew edition. The translator gave an introduction to the work. The author's introduction gets a little bit wordy and a little bit complicated, so they decided to sort of rewrite a new introduction for the Divine Code, the English version. But it was, the basic understanding is that there were a number of laws that were issued prior to Sinai, prior to giving of the Torah at Sinai. And these were for the functioning of society. Once the law was given at Sinai, only those parts that were given at Sinai, it would say repeated, meaning it was said over at Sinai, continued. And the other parts, even if they're logical, they do not have the level of a mitzvah, of a commandment from God. They can be instituted by the courts, but they're not considered divinely ordained. And this would be one of them. They were issued prior to Sinai. The command, the requirement not to marry an idolater or an idolatress was not repeated at Sinai, and therefore, technically, by Torah law, it's not a prohibition by Torah law, but it's an intellectual, reasonable thing to prohibit. Therefore, it could be prohibited by the courts. Rather, a Noahide court in any country may, and as explained in topic 1.9 above, has been granted the authority to make its own additional decrees and determine the penalties if those are violated. Nevertheless, the decree of Shem's court that one should not marry an idolater still stands. This can be viewed as based on the Noahide commandment of dinim, judgments, to have courts to establish rules for society. As explained in topic 1.9 above, a Gentile society may institute decrees to help banish idolatry or harmful sexual activities. Since the decree of Shem's court, Tractate of Avodah Zarah 39b, was recorded in the Torah in reference to the story of Tamar in Genesis 38:24, it was given eternal imminence. So it's on the level of a court edict that people should not marry idolaters, and it was important enough to be recorded in the Torah, even if it was not given as a commandment in the Torah. It was still the court order was given significance in the Torah, and therefore it should be respected by the courts as such. The court should see that as something worth following. From the Midrash, Shem started teaching divine precepts shortly after the flood, and he explained that the flood occurred because those precepts were transgressed. Shem was 98 years old when the flood came. See Rashi on Genesis 10:21, and Tana Divri Eliyahu 20:10 and 24:10. Shem prophesied for 400 years to all the nations of the world, but they did not listen to him. See also Yakut Shimoni, the beginning of Parshas Balak, that this occurred after the flood. Alternatively, the decree could have been a response by Shem, who was the King Melchizedek of Salem, Jerusalem. See Rashi on Genesis 14:18, to the idolatry that was being spread to the world by the king Nimrod at Babylon. At this time in history, around the time of the Tower of Babel, most of the world's population knew of Shem and his court. This is obvious from Tana Divri Eliyahu that states that Shem prophesied to all nations. Shem was recognized after the flood as God's prophet. See Rashi on Genesis 25:22. That's the story of Rebecca seeking after God's guidance, and according to Rashi, that meant that she went to Shem, because Shem was a prophet of God and a foremost spiritual leader of the world, although he was eventually surpassed by Abraham as a spiritual leader. So Shem was a highly recognized authority at that time, and that lends more credibility to his decrees, to his court decrees. This is clear from Tractate of Avodah Zarah that determines from the decree of Shem's court the nature of the prohibition after the flood was given. This would not contradict what is mentioned earlier, that according to Tractate Sanhedrin 59, any pre-Sinai divine commandment that was recorded by Moses in the sections of Torah preceding the revelation at Mount Sinai, but not repeated to Moses at that time, was removed from the Gentiles, and it remains only for the Jews. Since the decree of Shem's court was not a precept from God and was not removed, it was not removed from the Gentiles. So the argument that it was pre-Sinai and therefore was not repeated at Sinai, it was not considered a divine commandment prior to Sinai. Like circumcision was a divine commandment given to Abraham, but it was not repeated for Gentiles at Sinai, and therefore it was not considered something for Gentiles after Sinai. This, however, was a court decree, and as a court decree, it could pass through and still be of value after Sinai, and it's a model. It's something that the nations should adopt, but not as a divine commandment, but as a logical court, something the court should follow in all nations. Whether it would be for the wife or the husband is the idolater, it appears that even if two people are already married, but one begins to serve idolatry and is not willing to give up these ways, the other partner is obligated to divorce and separate. So the bottom line here is that pious non-Jews should not be married to idolaters, should not marry idolaters, and if the marriage partner becomes an idolater, should divorce the person for that. It's not proper to be married to an idolater. Thank you.